Yes, please, thanks for coming, showing up today, and going to give you a little bit of Valley history that has nationwide impact. Or probably, well, I just recently learned international impacts, but I'll talk a little bit about that in a little bit. My name is Juan Carmona. I'm a social studies teacher down at high school, dual enrollment instructor for South Texas College, and I also teach part-time at UTRGV. I teach U.S. history and Medicine American history. So all this is kind of like in my bag of things I do, but my specialty is border history. I love border history. I actually worked in healthcare for over 15 years and just started reading history book after history book and after history book and ended up switching careers. And like most like middle-aged men, like, oh, the Civil War, like I was into the Civil War until I read a book about Valley history and my mind was blown. I was living, most of my life here. I was born in Camp Lejeune. My dad was a Marine in Vietnam, but most of my life was here and I had not a clue. And that's really where all my research and writing has been ever since then. This is my first book. I'm currently working on 2 more books, which I'll get into as we move later on in the lecture. I would like to say before I get started that I'm going to assume, most of you are from here or if you're Winter Texans. But what I love is I've been able to take this story and out of here because it has now I just realized international impacts. I was recently in Miami talking to a nonprofit that they work in mass casualty incidents. They show up to help out. A lot of the people on the board lost people at 9/11 or different plane crashes. They responded to a lot of mass casualty incidents. And someone on there from Australia read this book and recommended it to the board. And they deal with mostly aviation and cruise industry, especially with COVID and all that. And they're looking to respond in different things, and they wanted to know more about this. So they actually flew me to Miami, and I did this exact lecture over there. I say that just to say how far I'm just happy that this story has gotten out as far as it has. People that were at that conference were from many different nations because they all use this group as their international group. So I met someone from, I want to say it was either Peru or Venezuela, who has a bus company. And his buses have the type of safety features, and so I'm going to get into the positive what happened. At least some positive came out. And I just recently found out that it's not just in the United States, but others have taken on these safety features. So just a little side note there. Let me see if I can. I had to do this because I was in Miami, so. What was fascinating is I was in Miami and I was there. One of the Australian ambassadors was there, and he said that his area used to come to Texas. So he had an office in McAllen, so he knew exactly what I was talking about. So just to the valley isn't unknown, really not that unknown as we thought. So I had to show him first what a caliche pit was because and a little note about this is in the early 1900s and into 1800s, 1900s, the Rio Grande Valley was mostly ranching. And then with the advent of the irrigation system and the railroad, it converted to farming. And all the area in the valley was known for the Magic Valley farming. Alton was known for its gravel, its caliche. If you drive around Alton, there's pits everywhere. In the era we call it the Gilded Age, in the early when the skyscrapers are going up and everything. Guess where all the gravel's coming from? Yeah, I had no idea until I was researching the history of Alton, and because it's named after the city where the train depot ended was Alton, Chicago, which is where they were taking the gravel up to. So that hence, if you drive around Alton, you'll see several pits. In fact, there's a much larger pit than this one, not too far behind it. So I wanted to start this. Everyone asked me how I got into this, because I'm not from Alton, I'm from Donna. And it's really, when I was younger, I want to say in middle school, it's hard for me to remember. I only remember exactly what happened. I don't remember anything more than that day. Very first accident or someone who I saw pass away was from a bus accident. I was walking home from school with my cousin along Old 83, and a bus literally was just passing us like that. And the emergency exit opened, and a kid flew out and landed at our feet and passed away. And so since then, anytime I hear something about a bus, it just sparks my memory. So I was a sophomore in high school when this happened. And so that's kind of why this story's been with me for a long time. For those of you who don't know, at that time, Alton was small, didn't have schools, so they would actually go to school here in Mission. And let me just, another quick side note, when my book first came out, I actually wanted to do my first signing here, but I think they were changing directors and emails got lost, so I'm glad to finally be here doing it because this is where I should have started it in the first place. They all went to mission schools. That school bus was on its second route. I learned a lot about school buses doing this. There's a lot of stuff I didn't know. The first route's usually the younger kids, the elementary, and then the second route is usually the middle school to high school kids. So it was on its second route when this happened. I recently heard that there's some thinking that they should reverse that, especially for after school, because they're saying the older kids should be home for when the younger kids get dropped off. So it's something that's in the air that they're talking about. Because if the younger kids are going home and there's no one there, So it's something they're talking about. But back then, and still to this day, the second wave is usually the older. So on this bus were middle and high school students. Now, I know a lot about the morning for the bus driver. He gave a very detailed account of his day. So I know like what time he woke up, and his wife cooked him breakfast and made him lunch. We know everything about the bus driver, but we don't know much about the Dr. Pepper truck driver who hit the bus because he refused to give any testimony to the NTSB. So like if you read in my book, well, I'll tell you like, oh, he did this, but as far as Ruben Perez, I don't know that much other than he got to the Coca-Cola plant and went on his route. For most of these kids, it's a normal day, and most of these kids all knew each other. They were the last pickups in that area in Alton, and they were all friends. They all knew each other. One of them told me that there was an apartment complex nearby that had a swimming pool, when sadly they'd all go swimming together, and it kind of plays itself out later, with the accident. But for them, just normal day, getting in the bus. I had to look this up because there was 81 kids on that bus. I'm like, how? I was like, is there not a max capacity? Now there is. But back then I found that there was a law that said that the first couple of weeks of school, because they're not quite sure how many kids are picking up, that they don't have like a limit. They settle the bus route in a couple of weeks and it goes down. I was told by some bus drivers that the limit really is depending on if they're little kids, it can fit more. If it's bigger kids, we tried to fit. We got up to 54 and that bus was crowded. I just cannot imagine. Yeah, we did this a couple of years ago. We're like, let's see how many kids will fit on a bus and just count them. And at 54, that thing was packed. I just can't imagine over 80 people being in that bus. Now, I use this image because, I forget I can walk around. These windows that you see up, down, some broken. This is the only way those kids got out. It's amazing that only 21 passed away when you think about what they had to do to get out. Because you can see the front door, smashed. The emergency exit, because the bus ends up laying on its side, you have to push up into the water to open it. So I usually, just to give you an idea, it was a cool morning, so a lot of the kids had the windows up. Now, in looking at Ruben Perez's driving record, he had actually been in an accident. He had several tickets. In fact, they had taken him off as a driver, and they made him a loader. And even to this day, it's two people on those distribution trucks, the driver and the loader, to help him unload and load. So he had been a loader, and then they had just put him back on as a driver. And he also had just made one delivery. So his trailer was full of beverages and full, and heavy, super heavy. Now, I'll do my best to describe what happened. I did this for a podcast and I was like, I don't know exactly how to describe this to you orally, but it's easier with a diagram. You can see the bus heading east to west, and the truck coming north. Ruben Perez will testify in court that his brakes weren't working. He was having trouble with the brakes. He's coming up this road. He also said he was unfamiliar with it, but he'd been on it for weeks, that route. So his loader told him, hey, there's a stop sign coming up, slow down. He said he didn't see the stop sign, but he did try to slow down. And he said the brakes weren't working. He tried the trailer brake and it didn't work. Some of the kids actually saw it coming. And they were screaming, they could see it about to hit them. And what ends up happening, as you can see here, is the front end hits this tail end of the bus, which kind of sends it a little this way. But what ends up happening is the truck swings around and the heavy trailer kind of swats it from behind. And it's the weight of that trailer that sends it into this caliche pit or gravel pit, which is about 40 feet deep. And if you want to understand what that looks like, the bus landed on its side. It landed on its nose, then fell over to its side. And there was enough water to cover the bus, but not too much more. It was only like those kids, only had inches to get to the surface. Today, the memorial that if you drive by there is right here. And you'll see the crosses and the statue there. But back then, it was completely open. Like you could just, in fact, some kids had already, a couple weeks before that, their car flew into it and they fell into the pit as well. There were discussions at that time, we maybe should do something about it, but it was like, well, it's not the city, it's the county, it's not the county, it's a railroad commission, it's a state, and well, eventually that does change. Oh, sorry. Is that, okay, sorry. So it was Mission School Bus number 6, 81 passengers. Kind of got ahead. 19 students would die at the site itself, and 2 more would pass away at the hospital. And a lot of kids and rescue workers ended up having to get all kinds of antibiotics because that water was filthy. Been standing there for a long time, and you add diesel fuel to it because the bus, and it was so dark and murky. When we talk about trying to get out, they talk about and they had just fallen this way. The kids fall forward, then to the side, very disorientating. And so, like I said, once again, it's like a miracle that only that many people died. And this is the image that always haunts me because you can see them, they're standing on top of the bus. And that's the image that always haunts me. Like you just think about how close they were to the surface, but once again, it was very disorientating. One of the there are tons of tragic stories. But one that really stood out to me was 2 brothers that were on that bus. And one got out, couldn't find his other brother, and jumped back in and never came out. And at the same time, their other brothers in the mission swim team in a swimming pool. This is 1989. Cell phones are barely being introduced. No one really has one. And especially a lot of these families didn't have phones, didn't have anything. And they could hear commotion, so you had parents running to the scene. You had every fire department, police department, border patrol, anyone who could, divers, they showed up within minutes. They're coming from all around. Most of my life I lived in Donner, but I live in Alamo now, and I'm doing some work on an incident that happened there. I'll get to it later, but I will point out that he recently passed away, but the fire chief of Alamo was one of the people that showed up. And the boat he used that day is still in the fire department because he just couldn't get rid of it. They took me to go see it like 2-3 years ago. And it's just sitting right there because he couldn't get rid of it, and they're not going to get rid of it. But just to show you how impactful it was to not just the children, the rescuers, people who witnessed it. Another interesting story to come out of, as far as rescuing and stuff was one of the students who got out saw this guy named Roque Sosa on the edge of the caliche pit, and he's calling him in Spanish to swim to him. And he sees him throw something out. And so he swims. I think it was like 15, 20 yards to get to the edge. And when he gets there, he thought it was a rope he threw down, but it was 2 water hoses tied together. And then he's like picking the boy up like super fast. He's like, man, this guy is strong. But when he gets to the top, the guy's on a horse. And just like a typical valley, image right there is just you have, but the ingenuity and the thought process for him to get there that fast, like what do I have? Tying 2 fire hoses, get on his horse, ride over there to help with the scene. That's just all the different people that tried to make their way over there and do something. But sadly, I told you I was in healthcare for over 15 years. Most of when the rescuers show up is what we call a recovery effort, because it takes 5 minutes for brain death if you're not getting oxygen. So you can imagine how much time passed before people are getting in the water. So mostly it was a recovery effort. That was a Thursday, and Friday night football. That week, no football game. But they had a huge service at Tom Landry Stadium. Over 10,000 people showed up. And it was reported that what they did is they released balloons for all the victims. And they said for some weird reason, the balloons gathered together in the middle of the field and went up together. And for some of the family, that was just a sign that they were together. I interviewed the district attorney at the time, Rene Guerra, who he was district attorney here forever. He said when he got the call, the first thinking like an attorney, 21 counts of manslaughter is what Ruben Perez gets charged with. The jury process and all that was just its own story in itself. The different things that the lawyers are doing to try to get the jury that they wanted. Ruben Perez, before the trial starts, is actually in a mental health facility. I used to work in McAllen Medical, and one of the house supervisors that was there, Ms. Lopez, had been with McAllen Medical when it was regional and downtown McAllen, had been there forever. And she told me that her sister, Ruben's sister was a nurse there, and she had to quit because he was having mental issues. So he's actually in a mental health facility before the trial and is brought from there to, go to trial. The NTSB does a investigation, and they even get the same trailer, the same truck, and it stops every time. And they had a little girl who was running behind the bus, but she missed it, so we witnessed everything. They had her help them tell them how everything happened so they could recreate it. And so their report was that it was the driver's fault. It was Ruben Perez's fault. And that's the report they submitted. There were several team members that wanted to continue looking into it, because one thing that the NTSB does is they don't not only go like, this is the cause of the accident, they look to come up with some sort of public policy on how to make things better. And that's actually what comes out of this. Now, at the trial, the prosecution witnesses end up being better for the defense. And one of the key experts was Don Aza. He was a brake expert. And he examined the brakes, and he said there was a lot of sludge in them, like mud and just filth in there. And he said what that means is sometimes the brakes will work and sometimes the brakes won't work. So that was reasonable doubt. And he gets acquitted. They also mentioned at that time period, they had just passed a law for more inspections of these types of trucks. And the beverage industry actually delayed it because they said, oh, it's going to cost us too much money. We got to hire more people. And when they did go over it, they said had they inspected it, that truck would not have gone out in service. And so, like I said, he gets acquitted. So if he's not at fault, who is? And that goes to Valley Coca-Cola, who owned the truck. Yeah, it was interesting when we were doing this research that it turned how small the valley is. That the spokesman for Coca-Cola, Julie Martinez, turned out to be my dad's cousin. And she had kept all the memos and paperwork. And she's like, here you go. All the people that told me to shred these are dead. So it was her job she set up a small office in Alton. And if the victims or family came to her, she had a checkbook and a ledger. What do you need? Here's a check. What do you need? Here's a check. And you can look at that ledger, and it can be, I mean, sometimes it's money for this, money for that. But it really, what I read and I see is you can tell the type of, the demographic of the people that passed away. You had people who asked for money because, the accident, their dad didn't work for 3 days and they're not going to compensate them. So lost wages, more clothes because they lost their clothes, school supplies. I mean, there's other things in there, but when you look at it and you just get a broad view of it, you can see the demographics of the community. A lot of it was stuff like that. Well, of course, Coca-Cola paid for all the funerals, paid for all the medical expenses, paid for all the psychological treatment. In a sense, besides, not inspecting the truck, right? Coca-Cola responded like that. So what she was doing was just literally writing a check, and she would just document, for a plane ticket for the relatives to come to the funeral or whatever it is, and she's documenting it. I have scans of all that stuff. But she was told that the minute that any of those people got a lawyer, she couldn't issue checks anymore. So that only lasted for a little bit. But, she was literally there, doing what, helping out. And the reason she gets chosen is she's the only one in the office who speaks Spanish. So that's how she ends up being, a part of all this. So the lawsuits start coming in. Valley Coca-Cola sued. Also Bluebird Bus Company, the maker of the bus. Even though that bus was up to the specs of the time, it wasn't in violation of anything, they get sued. So Coca-Cola and Bluebird end up issuing different settlements, from millions to people who lost somebody, to hundreds of thousands to those who survive, and to family members and stuff like that. One thing I'll talk about a little bit about the lawsuits is at that time after this accident, there was this huge campaign to limit lawsuits, because there were other things in play at that time. That December, if any of you are been in the Valley long enough, that December '88, there was a 3-story store called the Amigo store, and there was a huge storm, and the water collected on the roof, and it got too heavy and it pancaked down, killing a lot of people. So at the time of the Alton bus crash lawsuits, those lawsuits were going through as well, and you had this whole lawsuit abuse campaign that comes out of it, which is why in Texas there's a lot of caps to lawsuits, which sometimes that's why lawyers won't take your case, because it's not worth it for them. They're not going to make any money. But the positive thing, so one of the things, especially the windows, I forgot to describe how hard those windows were to open. I remember, because I was in band at the time, we took buses all the time. Those windows were much smaller, and they had these latches that you had to push really hard. It hurt to push them, and it was like 3 settings: 1, 2, 3. It's not like that anymore. But you can imagine that that would also hamper trying to get out of those things. And then now today we have windows that are much bigger, easier to open. You have sections of the bus that are open, and you also have hatches on the roofs. And as I was finishing writing the book, I just wanted to see, do these help? And it just took one quick Google, and I got a story from Mesquite, Texas. A bus hit a light pole. The light pole fell down, bus caught on fire. All the kids escaped through these hatches. Just to show that some good has come out of it. And so, today, your kids or kids here, your buses are so much more safe because of this, what happens, what comes out of this accident. That's not all of them because this came out the next day, then the other two passed away in the hospital. And I was really happy to go share this story in Miami because these kids shouldn't be forgotten, and I want this story to get out because all the buses everyone's riding in today, it's because of them that they're much safer. And that's the memorial if you've never been there. It's on that corner exactly where the accident happened. Like right here is where the bus went in. And if you ever go in the park on the other side and just stand there and look, and it looks like a cliff to me. Like I'm just surprised how that those kids weren't that hurt. Because if you look at the coroner's report, nobody died of traumatic injuries. They all died from drowning. So it was just, it was a survivable crash, as the NTSB said. But when you see it, it doesn't seem like it would have been a survivable crash. It was high up there, but I'm guessing the water slowed down the impact. Now, my brother is also an author, and he was making fun of me. He's like, "Are you just doing crash or disaster?" But it's interesting how these stories come to me. One day, I am coming down Tower Road and Business 83, and I'm stuck in traffic. And I noticed that off in the distance, there's a historical marker. And it's too far away, but I can see the word train crash. That's all I can see. So I get to the house, and I immediately Google train crash, Alamo, Texas, and that's how I found out this story. In my Mexican American Studies class, I always try to do a project with the kids or something. So I had this idea because I just heard a podcast in Atlanta. A teacher had done this to some middle school. They told a story that happened in Atlanta. And since I'm not with my students, what can we do? So I told them the story, and we turned it into a podcast. I think it was 4 episodes, which tells the story of it. And we got so much information that it's now going to, I'm almost done with the book. We already have a publisher. And that, seeing those names there, these are all farm workers. And you can see the range of ages of all the kids that are involved. 8 years old is the youngest. Let me go over here. In March 4th, 1940, a train was going from east to west from Donna toward Alamo. And coming up along the highway in a parallel course, but a little ahead of it, was a truck with over 40 farm workers. Now, these numbers are so inaccurate. When I was going through all the newspapers and stuff, I was getting different names. Like that list of names took about a year to put together because the reporting was just, I think sometimes they were just hearing rumor, or someone was just saying something like, "Oh, there was a baby on the floor," or whatever. And I'm like looking, going through death certificates, there's no baby there. But it took forever to sort through. But anyway, so about 40 farm workers were guessing were in a truck, and driven by Jose Ramon. And as he was crossing the railroad tracks, the train hit the truck, dragged it about 750 yards, sending the farm workers flying in every direction, dragging the truck, as you can see here. And it was on fire. They put it out. And, you read different accounts, whether it blew its whistle or not. I talked to a train expert, and he's like, sometimes they might be in a rush. We're looking at different things. Was the driver not paying attention or whatever? And he told me, sometimes the drivers are in a rush. Sometimes they're actually asleep, But a train can't stop. Even if they saw the truck, there was nothing they could do. Hitting that truck, and it still went 750 yards. If you're ever in Alamo, there's a bar and grill called the Rail Yard. That's where it stopped. If you're in Tower Road and Highway 83, all the way, that's how far it took that. The county judge right now, that's his grandfather, the Hidalgo County judge. Yeah, the age range was 8 to 50. A lot of them were young teenage girls, and I was told that back then, because a lot of these kids workers were from Stark County, which where the Ramon family used to be. And he had a house in Donna. And they would go over there and recruit people to come work, and they'd stay at Ramon's house. He is a mayordomo, which is like a manager. He would go, like, let's say if you owned a farm, he was the one, like, how many workers do you need? He would take care of the workers and all that. So that was his job. So a lot of these people came from Stark County, and I was told that a lot of them were like young women because they were trying to find them husbands. So that's why a lot of the kids' names and ages you'll see are young women who were on that truck. And yeah, this took, like I said, a better part of a year to finally put this together, but we really don't know who was on the truck. We have descriptions that some jumped off right before it happened. As far as the truck is concerned, we've been looking at it over and over. I think they did a one-day investigation. That was it. I think I've been looking at it a lot more than them. And as far as the truck driver, the only things we can think of is it's reported in the news that his passenger window was broken into, so it was busted, and it was a cool morning, so they covered it with a cardboard. So we're not sure if maybe he didn't see it. I mean, no one directly drives in front. If he didn't see it, and he had his sons right next to him, so he would have had to, like, see his sons off to the side. He definitely would have been ahead of the train, so it's not like the train was right next to him, because then he could, wouldn't have happened the way it happened. Nowadays, that's why we have a lot of different train crossings and signals and those things that come down to block you. And these accidents were happening a lot, especially in the valley. I found a reference to one just a few weeks after this in Harlingen that killed 11 farm workers. And the other project that should be done by December, and this was, like I said, my brother was like, you just do disasters, but it just kind of fell into my, I listen and do a lot of podcasting, and I came across this, like everyone else did who listened to it. It was during COVID, and it was during that winter where, like, nothing, the internet was off or the power was off, and there was like, everyone kind of found this story. And if you don't know what that is, that's the Queen Isabella Causeway. In 2001, 3 days after September 11th, a tugboat hit it and brought down a section of the bridge. In the middle of the night, it was almost 2 a.m. For weeks, they'd been complaining that the lights weren't on the bridge. So there was a hurricane in Florida, and it was messing with the tides. There was actually a small craft advisory that day, and the tides were real rough. So what the Coast Guard report says, and some of the testimony of other captains who've sailed that area, is that without the lighting, there was only one buoy to light up his way, because normally those barges come through here. But the current was probably pushing it hard. His engines were at over 100%. And trying to get through there, and he's pushing it. He's not pulling, he's pushing. So you imagine how much control he has. And actually the captain wasn't captaining the vessel at that time. He was the second in command, because everybody was asleep because it was 2 a.m. Some of the other captains said that, like, a little bit more experience, if that guy was a little more experienced, he probably would have noticed that was happening, but he didn't. And he ends up hitting that bridge and taking it out. Also, because there was no lights, you can't see where he was going. I just finished rereading parts of this report for that one car that actually didn't go in the water. You can see it hit. The driver tried to speed up once he realized he couldn't stop, and actually made it to the pillar and hit and slid down. It's an amazing story of the paramedic who got in there. It was three firefighters got up on the pillar, and the car is still moving. And the smallest one, which was really interesting, he has my nickname JP. He's the smallest one, and they sent him in the car, and he's there trying to get the guy out while the cars. They try to use rope, the other firefighters, but he even tells them at one point, because they can see the water, it's like, if you feel water, just hold your breath. We're going down together, and I'll get you out. Fortunately, they were able to get him out, but unfortunately, he didn't. He died on his way to the hospital. Now, Robert here is it was him, his cousins, and a friend that decided to go fishing. And they ignored the small craft advisory. He had a really nagging sister who kept calling him and telling him, hey, you shouldn't be out there. He's like, and he's in the pier. So he's not out in the bay yet. So he doesn't, there's nothing wrong out here, and hung up on her. But that's also the reason he was the only one out in the water. And he rescued the only 3 survivors. And he was out in that water for over like an hour before people started to show up. The Coast Guard, the first Coast Guard boat didn't even want to help him, sent him to another Coast Guard boat. They didn't want to help him. They sent him to the Coast Guard station on Port Isabel. The bridge is out. There's no hospitals in Port Isabel. So then he has to go all the way back across the bay to, I'm sorry, they sent him to the Coast Guard station on the island. And with the bridge out, there's no hospitals on the island, so he had to take all back across the bay. But it really scarred him because he saw a lot that day. He said for the longest time, brake lights would freak him out. Because that's all you would see as the cars are coming, because people were just instinctively hitting their brakes. And it was interesting is one car fell on top of another car, on top of another car. They like stacked up. So when the JP's rescuing that guy, he could literally see the other cars down there. And he can see some of the lights still going on and off, and he was wondering if there were still people in there, which there was. One of the persons that passed away that day was the fire chief from Port Isabel. He was actually, just to show you how little they pay firefighters, he's the fire chief of Port Isabel, but he's working security at Louis' backyard that night to make some extra cash. JP actually is a paramedic in Brownsville and Port Isabel because, once again, tried to make up some extra cash. He heard it because he's fire chief, he still has his radio. He hears it, gets in his truck and drives. Almost all the initial rescuers thought there was an accident on the bridge. So he flew over there and flew off. In fact, Robert encounters 2 firefighters from Port Isabel asking, did you see a red truck? Did you see a red truck? And the boat they were on wouldn't get any closer because it was much bigger, and Robert's just a little fishing boat. And he took them over to the accident. They went down and they came back up, and they just said it's a recovery effort. 3 days after September 11th, Robert and all his cousins are tossed into different interrogation rooms all night long, being interrogated by Texas Rangers and cops and stuff. Because think about it, a plane just flew into the Twin Towers, took out the Twin Towers. A boat just hit the bridge and took out the bridge. In that, he was even scared. He didn't want to go help because it sounded like, an explosion. And then pieces of the bridge hitting the water are like gunshots. So he was scared to go, but his cousin convinced him, told him like, hey, there might be kids in the water. And he called his wife. It's really interesting when you think like, you read the stories in 9/11 where everyone's calling home or saying goodbye. He literally picked up his phone, called his wife, told her. She was so half asleep. I interviewed her later, like I had no idea what he was talking about, some bridge or whatever. She was out of it. It was 2 a.m. And she's like, okay, whatever. And he was just like, tell my son I love him. And he hung up and took off to go help. But yeah, they were interrogated all night long. They're like, write down everything that you've done since September 11th until today. They made a documentary called The Collapse. It's won tons of awards, even international awards. And I'm currently he wanted to turn his story into a book. And the only reason I took it on is because I'm working on the train crash one. Is like, I'm just basically transcribing his story. I'm like, okay, I can do that. So I'm almost done doing that right now. But if you're interested to see more, you can look at the podcast, the true story of the Queen Isabella Causeway collapse, or the Collapse documentary. And one of the reasons he finally was talking just recently is because he had a gag order for 20 years. He couldn't speak about it. And he told me, he's like, go Google. There's a certain point where no more stories come out and there's no extra information because they were all told they couldn't talk because of the agencies involved, the Coast Guard. And there was a lot of like, trust me, I could talk forever because there's a lot of side stories of issues that were happening, the Coast Guard not wanting to help. And they even picked up one of the victims and put him back down. No, we're not going to take him. And then there's another crazy twist in there, which I won't say, but I will tell you. I was drinking some water. When I got to that part of the podcast, I almost dropped my drink. I mean, the story itself is crazy. You can check it out, like I said, hopefully by next year the book will be up. Yes?
Do they have any bigger agencies
It made national news, but it was quickly swallowed up by the terrorists, the investigation. Because you're talking just days. Like, we still don't know what happened in 9/11, let alone this. And 9/11 was the bigger story. So if you're ever on the island, like going to the island, and you're driving, you feel a bump, that's where it broke. It was months before the bridge was put back together. They had to use a ferry back and forth. Like, Robert took months before he got his truck back. Everything he had was on the other side. He actually was the first vehicle across. The mayor let him take it. So the first vehicle across the fixed bridge is his. He never used that boat again. It was the second time he ever used it. His wife said something, and I'm quoting her, and she said that the boat did what it had to do. Like, it saved those people after that, because it was all scratched up and beat up and full of blood and all kinds of stuff, and it ends up being auctioned off later. But that's a little bit of Valley history. I want to stop with time 2, if anyone has any questions. I think that's it. Yeah. Anyone have any other questions or anything they want to ask?
What are the safety issues that came out of that accident?
They're actually putting in different warning systems in the water. I picked up an article about some of the stuff they're talking, and then once again they're still talking that even at that time they talked about it, and they're still talking about it today, putting a second bridge. Because I forgot to mention is the water line that take fresh water to South Padre Island and the power were along the bridge, so it cut both off. In fact, that's what made the rescue so dangerous. I forgot to mention that is the water's gushing down, and right next to it's a huge live wire swinging back and forth. Yeah.
So were all the cars taken out?
Yeah, eventually they took them out. Yeah, he talks about because they pulled the bodies out and they made him see all that in court, and a lot of that stuff scarred him.
What were the casualties?
9 people passed away.
Do you think that metal fence or concrete fence would have stopped the Alton crash with the load and everything?
Well, I think that what they have now is probably sufficient, but it was a bus, which is pretty heavy.
The bus and the weight of the truck and all that.
Yeah. So I'm not sure, to be honest, but like I would think that hopefully they would, the barriers they have, they're thinking trucks might come by, so we need something that will stop trucks.
So what happened to the guy, the Coca-Cola driver? So he was not guilty?
Not guilty. He ends up in, like I said, in rehab, mental rehab. I tried to get a hold of him, didn't want to talk.
But he's home already.
Yeah, from what I understand, he lives in Mission.
How old would he be now?
Oh, I don't know. I'd have to do the math. He was in his early 20s,
When it happened, so
30. So yeah, it's probably pushing 60 by now.
and the bus driver survived? The bus driver survived?
Yeah, he survived, but he passed away years later from a heart attack. Those of you who, because I see some of my students, you know where the subway is in Donna? Behind there used to be his house. He was from Donna. Yes, ma'am.
Any tally on how the Mission bus accident survivors recovered? Because I know I was in school when that occurred, and there were some that would miss 3 days out of the following weeks, 3 days per week, because they had still soquete in their lungs, they were sick, everybody did continue.
Yeah, I had, and I don't blame them, but I had a hard time getting people to talk. And I'm not like those reporters that'll just, you don't want to talk. I talked to a couple people on the phone, but they're like, no formal interview. They just told me a little bit. I'd have to grab a piece of paper. One story, one lady I talked to, she lost both her sisters. One of them was buried in her quinceañera dress. And the sister I talked to was pregnant at the time of the accident. And the girls were just like excited to see the baby being born, but they didn't get to. And she said when that kid was young, anytime a siren would go off, the kid would just cry and scream. So that's from what I can gather from what I have been able to. Like a lot of people did lose their money. You buy a huge. You're looking at people like never owned houses before. Don't understand. Like you can buy $100,000 house, but you're gonna have to keep paying taxes on that forever. You only get one check. Some did. I know one became a lawyer with that money. Some. I interviewed one guy who worked for customs. So some it affected them, but. I don't know, they're, as that much about the aftermath, only from the people I could talk to, that were willing to talk.
Do you know how many are still alive when the bus happened?
I would assume all of them, but I don't know. Like I said, a lot of people would, I tried, but once again, I'm not going to be. Actually, I'm thinking about it because it's funny, once you write a book, everyone then starts coming out going like, hey, I was there, or I know this person. I'm like, so I'm thinking about doing a follow-up once I finish with those.
School perspective, the parents,
Yeah.
us, that when we were there, it was,
Yeah, I interviewed, it was funny how small the valley is. I was talking about that I was writing this book in one of my classes, and one of the little girls raised her hand. My mom witnessed the accident. So just show you how small the valley is. And so, of course, I went and interviewed her as well. Any other questions? And I do have copies of the book for sale if anyone wants it or hasn't seen it or read it. Other than that, like I said, check out if you want to know a little bit more about the other two. There's podcasts on both of those. And then
About the ones that are still alive or the ones that were on the bus
I'm
accident?
sorry, ma'am?
The ones that were on the bus accident that lived.
Mhm.
You guys don't talk about them on the book or anything?
A little bit, because it's like I said, a lot of them didn't get back to me or I couldn't get a hold of.
But on your book, it's written down all the ones that did live?
The list of everyone on the bus? No, I don't have a list of everyone on the
And the
bus.
ones that lived?
Yeah. I have a list of the people that passed away. I couldn't find a list of everyone on the bus.
My little brother was on that bus.
Okay. Yeah.
He already passed away, but he was on that bus.
Okay.
We live off 5 Mile Line.
And,
Stewart.
right, yeah,
So,
right there.
we're real close.
Oh.
Yeah, right there on our block, we had 5 houses and I think 5 students. But they all lived.
All,
I
wow.
mean, they all lived, yeah.
Yeah. But sorry that your brother passed away.
He already passed away like, what, 4 years ago? Yeah.
Where's my? Could I get your number before we leave?
Mine?
Yeah.
I have, okay, but my phone don't ring right, but I'll get you a number there, you can tell.
Okay. All right. Yeah, I'm still looking to follow it up. Because I've gotten more now that the book's out. I get more people coming to me.
The people that were in the accident and got their money, a lot of them died already. A lot of them, they had a bus accident, they had a car accident.
Yeah, the car accident. I was a paramedic. My partner responded to that.
Some of the bus accident were in there on that car,
Mhm.
and one wasn't. My little brother was supposed to be in that,
Oh wow.
but my brother didn't let me go out.
Yeah, I mentioned that in the book. My partner, when I was a paramedic, responded to that accident. It was a couple of the boys that
I mean, my mom and my brother were standing up there. My little brother was standing on the bus. He helped carry out a few.
Mm. Yeah, they were literally rescuing each other.
Yeah.
It comes down to, because like I said, by the time everyone gets there, it's like you got like 5 minutes to bring. The kids were pulling each other out.
Oh yeah, my little brother told me that he got up, they pulled his legs, and he still got up and got out.
Yeah, some of the people I talked to talk about that because I mean desperation, just clawing your way out, and some were pulling each other down and stuff like that.
Yeah, they did. They panicked. They panicked, and they, you know what I mean? Yeah, I always
Yeah.
told them they should leave medical open because all of them were going to come out with cancer. That water. went through
Yeah, they don't even know what was in that water. That's why they gave them tons of antibiotics.
apartments, all their urine and everything.
Sorry.
The two students that went on and died at the hospital, did they die due to infection?
Yeah, the infection that came from the pneumonia and the infection that came from it.
And my little brother was in the hospital for a few days. And the people on the block, I know the one girl, Bonnie, she was in there for like 3 weeks. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I remember reading that they weren't sure what was in that water, so they just gave them all kinds of antibiotics. So I remember when I was working in McAllen Medical, something similar happened. Some patient came and we were coding her, and a gas came out. They had no idea what it was. She was exposed to some pesticide, so we all just got shots of everything.